Leading off our discussion tonight is Yasmin Bruno Valdez, a college student from Kansas who knocked doors advocating for abortion rights prior to yesterday's referendum. Also with us, Olivia Juliana, activist and strategist for Gen Z for Change. She raised over $2 million for abortion rights in response to an attack by Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz. Thank you both for joining us. Yasmin, I'll start with you first. What is your reaction to last night's results and turnout? Were you surprised at all, given what you've heard from talking to actual voters in Kansas? What message does this send?
Well, I think it sends a very clear message that we are here and that we aren't going anywhere, and we're going to stand for reproductive rights, no matter how long and how much work it takes. As an organizer, I know what it was like to knock on doors in the hot weather, and definitely I would do it a million times again, just to ensure that every person in Kansas could be assured reproductive rights. So yeah, I was completely amazed, and I'm still so excited. I've been on cloud nine all day.
Tell us more about the experience of knocking on doors and talking to voters on the ground. You know, as a political analyst, pundits, we sit in studios and we do analysis based on polling data and focus groups. But there's nothing to compare to actually talking to real people. And as you mentioned, it was in the summer, which is very hot. So talk about that experience of actually talking to people about this referendum.
Yes. So like you mentioned, it was really hot. But aside from that, that didn't take us away from canvassing and knocking on doors every day that we could. We phone banked, text banked. We did everything that we could to ensure that voters were informed, that they knew exactly what they were voting for. As you may have known, the amendment was actually written in a very confusing, very kind of like, elitist way, where if you knew exactly what it meant, even if you were super informed, even if you were super involved, like you still didn't know really what voting no and what voting yes meant. And they did that all strategically. They did this on purpose. They were a very well-funded Vote Yes campaign. They sent out lots of misinformation, and our voters were confused. And that's exactly what our canvassing efforts tried to fight against. We made sure that people were informed, and that low propensity voters, first-time voters, first-time registered voters, that they all had the information that they needed to get to the polls, vote early, and really get their choice of voting no being made. And so we were so excited that we did not let voter suppression beat us in Kansas with all the gerrymandering, anything that happened. Because this was a nonpartisan amendment, we were able to get to talk to people from both sides of the aisle, Republicans, Democrats, and anybody under the sun in Kansas.
I love all of that, because it gives people some color about what that experience is like if they haven't done it themselves. And Olivia, you were body shamed by Matt Gaetz, and I actually haven't asked you before, but what was your very first thought? Was it, let's raise some money for abortion funds? I mean, why did you decide to utilize a personal attack against you, a private citizen and 19-year-old from a congressman, to help fundraise for the issue that you care so much about?
I am a private citizen. I am a young person, but first and foremost, I'm an activist. I'm an organizer. And when I have the opportunity to do something that's going to help people in my community, that's going to fight for the causes that I care about, that's what I'm going to do. So by attacking me, by blasting me on Twitter, Matt Gaetz gave me a national platform to talk about why bodily autonomy is important and why abortion access is something that people across the country care about.
So just a quick follow, Olivia, why is bodily autonomy so important? What message do you hope Americans got from this moment where the attention is on you because of the attack?
Abortion is healthcare. Point blank, period. We are hearing horror stories from across the country of people who can't get access to abortion services, whose hospitals will not give them access to the care they need, where they are slowly dying in their beds because hospitals are afraid to provide these procedures to them at the fear of being sued or prosecuted by these state governments. It's a healthcare procedure. It's a very difficult decision for someone to have to come to make. So by outlawing this procedure, by targeting women across the country, Republicans are essentially saying they do not care about your health. They do not not care about your freedom, and they do not care about your constitutional rights. This is precedent that has been set for decades, long before I was born. And so for them to go after this, not only are they attacking your freedom, but they're also ignoring voters and opinions of people across the country. An overwhelming amount of people support access to abortion, and that's what we saw last night in Kansas.
Yeah, I think it shows that the polling was accurate. A majority of Americans do support choice. Olivia, do you think the older generations perhaps underestimate the power of Gen Z in affecting change? I think that you get cast as like maybe overly sensitive snowflakes or maybe, angry about climate change. But do you think that's basically an underestimation of your power potentially?
I think it's an extreme underestimation. I know for as long as I've been conscious of politics, I've heard the age-old notion, young people don't vote. Young people don't care about voting. And we've seen that that's not true. We saw it in 2020 in the presidential election when young people turned out in record to vote out Donald Trump. We saw it in Kansas. We saw young people registering to vote. We saw first-time voters. This is showing not only do young people have power at the ballot box, but they're making their voices heard. We see young organizers in political campaigns across the country. We see young organizers in nonprofits and abortion funds across the country. And so I think that this idea that young people aren't politically involved or they aren't social justicely involved is one that is blatantly false. And I think it's meant to demoralize a lot of young people from getting involved in these causes. But clearly it's not working.
Yasmin, same question to you. Do you think you're underestimated? And why do you think your generation is so impatient in this moment? And you're just going out, you're ignoring all the analysis, and you're going to create the change you want to see.
Yes, so I definitely do think I completely agree with everything you said. I think we're underestimated, we're unaccounted for, we aren't seen as actual powerhouses in the ballot box, when in fact we are. When I personally cannot vote as I'm a DACA recipient, so I understand, not being able to participate within our democracy, but I do everything that I can to mobilize everyone I know to get out and vote. Gen Z, millennials, we were raised under the notion that abortion was a right, that is not something that could be stripped away. So when Roe v. Wade was ruled, we knew that they were coming after us and that we had to do something, specifically in Kansas. We knew we were going to be the first state to vote after Roe v. Wade. And we knew we had to mobilize as many people as possible. We did not sit there and cry and be scared like the snowflakes do, right? We stood up and fought. We knew what we had to do, and we got it done. I got so many of my friends that were first-time voters, low propensity voters that have never been talked to mobilize to the polls. And whether it was sending them election guides, whatever, finding their polling locations, giving them rides, anything that I could do to make sure that they were well informed and that they were excited to vote, made me feel like I was right there with them.